Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Island families. We hope you enjoy this evening's edition.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. My name is Jim Riley. I'll be your host tonight. Once again, we've got Dr. Okurowski.
Good to be back.
All right, great to have you. The last show we did was terrific. This is another issue that's very important to lots of people, especially here in New England. And what we're going to be talking about is Lyme disease. So it's we're right in the middle of our big tick season for the year. So give us a little primer on what we need to know and what we need to do about this very infectious disease.
It's a timely topic. There is at least some preliminary evidence that we had a sort of a, wet late winter, early spring, and there's lots of people reporting high incidence of tick exposure. And
how does that sort of wet, soft weather, how does that?
Well, what we believe is that's sort of the environment. Sometimes a warm late winter wet is conducive to a high tick population. But what we're at least seeing is lots of people reporting exposures. And what we need to know is Lyme disease is really the most commonly reported tick-borne illness in the United States. And it's a disease with a pretty large scope. CDC estimates anywhere from 20 to 25,000, maybe upwards of 30 to 50,000 diagnosed cases. But there's also more and more evidence of underreported cases we're missing. And recent evidence suggests that the numbers may be much higher. And that means, all of us, both in the public and also the medical community, need to be focusing more attention to this disorder.
Everybody knows somebody who's had Lyme disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And the goal here is not to create panic. It's more educated vigilance. And, we all like to encourage outdoor activity, whether that's, our kids or spending time in the woods, walking, or, outdoor activities like, golf and hiking. So we all have potential exposure. It's also not uncommon even found in urban and semi-urban environments, in brush, in parks. So it's not something that's no longer confined to just rural areas. It's clearly higher incidences in rural areas, but we all need to be aware that when we're outside and in the brush or in the grass, we need to be careful. And also should be mentioned that some of the first cases come clearly from New England. Lyme, Connecticut is the reason why it's called Lyme disease. But some of the highest prevalences are also in our islands. Plum Island, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket. Clearly see some high rates, and we have a lot of folks that spend some vacation time there, so those folks need to be aware of those issues too.
I wonder why the islands are more prevalent than
Yeah, there's lots of conspiracy theories on that one, but I sort of stick to some of the science. But there's lots of people with theories. We don't really know exactly where Lyme disease clearly came from, but everybody has their ideas.
Well, I grew up in Connecticut. And in Connecticut, they believe that the Animal Research Center out on Plum Island let something out of a cage, and it wound up getting into Lyme, and then it started Lyme disease.
I hear
that's
these.
the local folklore.
Right, I hear these. I don't necessarily think there's a lot of science to support that, but it's certainly an interesting story. But we clearly have seen an explosion of incidents, over the last 20 to 30 years, and it's spreading across the United States, and it's clearly in New England and Southwest is now seeing some cases. It's clearly being found in the Southeast. So it's something that may or may not have started in New England, clearly first recognized here, but now is not only a state issue, but also multi-state issue, but also now becoming more international, clearly into Canada and other regions. So it's something we all need to be aware of, and I would agree with you. Most of us know at least somebody, either in their immediate family or a friend or relative, that's been exposed to this. The good news is, caught early, it's quite treatable, but it's also preventable, and we'll start talking about some of those issues. It should also be mentioned, though, that it's something that employers and employees need to be more aware of, and we clearly see folks being exposed in the trades, in construction, landscaping, forestry, people doing land surveying, farming, railroad work, oil field work, utility line workers, who all spend significant times outside, need to be really aware of that.
I want to take a moment to talk about the actual tick itself. Now, from what I understand, ticks are born in nests, and after they're born, off they go and climb up somewhere, and instinct tells them, okay, sit tight and wait for a host.
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't want to get super technical here, but a lot of people do ask the questions. It should be important to emphasize that Lyme disease really is passed by a specific type of tick, and that's the black-legged tick. So that would be separate from your dog tick. And you'll see on the news and cards and on the internet, it's how to differentiate that. We'd like to minimize exposure to all ticks. But when we talk about Lyme disease, we need to be clear that we're really talking about what is called the black-legged tick and not the standard dog tick. And
Not the deer tick?
Good question, good clarification. The black-legged tick is sort of synonymous with the deer tick. And the reservoir where these ticks live is really in small animals. It's actually found on mice, squirrels, and other small rodents. Deer get labeled because the nymphs, the small ticks, actually leave the mice and then grow to adults on large woodland animals like deer, but they also can be on other animals, raccoons, coyotes, and actually humans. And so that's where deer tick is sort of become synonymous with the black-legged tick in the eastern United States. Again, not to get too technical, but when you hear terms like deer tick or black-legged tick, they're essentially synonymous in the eastern United States, and that's the tick as opposed to the American dog tick. It's the black-legged or deer tick that causes or carries Lyme disease, and it's really the nymph that we're most concerned about. But again, the initial host is small animals like rodents, mice, and then these ticks grow and feed on larger animals, humans potentially being one source, or the deer. But getting back to that issue, that's important as families often ask, for example, how can we help control our population in our own yard? It's really one of the hallmarks of minimizing exposure in the yard, separate from repellents, et cetera, is controlling the mouse population and the rodent population, and that's important to do. One of the very simple things that, for example, folks often don't realize is things like bird feeders being too close to the house. What happens is, the birds come, drop the seed. What does the seed do? It attracts the mice. The mice, in particular, come close to your home, can increase the tick population in your yard. So one of the things that often specialists in this area recommend is if you're going to have, bird feeders, et cetera, move things to the periphery if you're concerned about, the tick population in fact in your yard.
That's something I didn't know. One of the producers of this program, Tom Carr, lives down in Charleston, Rhode Island, and out in the country, and he's got he could do a tutorial on how to survive living in tick land. But what are some things that folks can do? What are some, let's say, defensive things?
This is a hot topic, and one of the reasons why is
preventive maintenance, I guess you would say.
In preventing exposure, one of the clear issues we have is how to keep the ticks off you. And it's whenever you're outside, you need to do some major things with clothing. Keep skin areas covered. Light colored clothing works great. Keep often high socks. But the other issue is the use of repellents like DEET. And many individuals don't want to use DEET. Many people are
Tell
scared.
us about DEET.
Well, DEET is a highly successful repellent, and it does repel ticks. It's
Where can you buy DEET?
You can buy DEET at any sporting goods shop, also any camping store. Many your CVS would carry it.
Oh, okay.
Many moms are concerned about the health effects of DEET on children. What we need to recognize, though, is if you really want to make sure you're going to repel those ticks, DEET is clearly the most effective. There are some natural products. Some may be effective. It's difficult to compare, though, to the effectiveness of DEET. One of the things that often folks do, though, is they wear protective clothing. There's also protectively treated clothing, permethrin-treated clothing you can find at a camping store. Those also have some repellent properties. All good ways to explore. What I tell folks with kids is if they're concerned, by all means, talk to your family practice provider. And it's clearly an area that if you're concerned, it should be voiced. But again, it needs to be recognized that Lyme disease is a serious illness, so you really need to protect yourself if you're going to spend some time out in the woods. So if you choose to be out there, you need to protect yourself, and many folks choose wrongly not to, and I think that's why we see a lot of the exposure. The other important thing we need to discuss is, once you've been outside in the woods, you need to have a systematic process for checking yourself. And what a lot of folks do is, fully take off their clothing. Many families do what's called a tick check. So they actually take the time to examine a child or other adult, make sure there's no ticks on them, make sure they shower appropriately, and really take that process to heart. Many families I know in wooded areas do that nightly, just to make sure if the kids have been out in the yard or exposed to the dog, they've really been systematic about that process. The other one is if you have a family pet, you need to be concerned that the dogs can bring the ticks in, whether they're dog ticks or the deer ticks. So you need to really make sure that those dogs are checked. Cats can be possible exposure too. Many people don't like to hear this, but it also raises in the summer months. Sleeping with your pets, you need to make sure that your ticks are in fact free from, your dogs are in fact free from those ticks. So these are all issues that are really part of a systematic process for prevention.
Okay, let's get to this. Got just a couple of minutes left. Let's tell us about the symptoms and how people are going to know that they have.
The classic thing we've all heard of is the bullseye lesion.
Right.
Now, that's not 100% a guarantee that if you do or do not have a bullseye lesion, you're not exposed. But it's clearly a hallmark. If you do have a bullseye lesion that develops after a bite, you need to take it seriously and report it to your provider. But other issues that come up are things like fever, unexplained joint and muscle pains, headaches, chills, fatigue. Those are really the secondary hallmarks after exposure. So you need to be vigilant about those and by all means report those to your healthcare provider who can then do some blood tests. And the important thing to recognize is with appropriate early detection, it's treatable with very basic antibiotics, and that's the good news. And so if you're concerned about it, by all means, talk to your family practice doc about it. And on the flip side, if you're in the workplace and you think you've been exposed, clearly talk to your safety and health professional, because I personally treat many in the construction outdoor trades where folks will be sent over to me to be examined because they potentially have been exposed.
Well, this has been a terrific show.
Thank you.
And I know that our regular listeners will probably, regular viewers have probably learned a lot about something that they think they know a lot about, but really needed to know. Dr. Okurowski, thank you so much for coming here today. This has been a terrific show. And that's it for this edition of Labor Vision. We'll see you next time.
When they finally passed the bill, it just felt like a weight just fell off your shoulders. We can go back tomorrow, pick up where we left off, but kind of having a brighter step, a little bit more pep in our step.
The biggest motivation for me is to keep teachers in West Virginia. There's a shortage of math and science, and all of our students deserve highly qualified teachers.
It's just amazing to see the spirit out there and the unity between all of the counties.
This is my first year being a teacher, and I have held hands with teachers that taught me, and it's just been great. I've never witnessed anything like it.
It has been a roller coaster ride. We have been very hopeful at times that things were getting ready to be passed, and then it's like the rug gets jerked out from underneath us. They're discussing unfreezing PIA.
It was just amazing knowing that the nation was watching, knowing that people were inspired, when part of the time we were just hanging on by a thread and trying to say, how do we get through the next hour?
West Virginia educators!
Like Randy Weingarten, it's amazing to have the national president come all the way down here to stand with us in the picket lines. After experiencing these past 8 days, I really truly understood what the union is for and what it represents. How union membership will be even stronger than it was before.
We're already starting to see that other states are starting to follow. Oklahoma.
Christine, I'm signing yours right now. Don't you throw nothing.
It's been emotional for me today. I think it's going to be even more emotional to really look at what we just did here as a state.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. My name is Jim Riley. I'll be your host tonight. My guest is my old friend Frank Flynn, the president of the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals. Frank, our viewers just saw about a 2-minute video about what's going on, a very topical issue right now, the teachers in West Virginia. And you know, I'm a student of labor. I belong to the Rhode Island Labor History Society. I'm interested in labor history. And West Virginia is home to some of the greatest labor strikes in U.S. history. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877, the Great Coal Strike of 1902, the Battle of Blair Mountain in 1921, and the Black Lung Strike of 1969, just to name a few. Now, we haven't heard a lot from West Virginia regarding labor activism in recent years. Matter of fact, they even went right to work in 2016. But just days ago, the governor of West Virginia publicly signed a contract raising the pay of West Virginia classroom teachers by 5% after a 9-day statewide strike. Frank, thanks to those brave teachers, the long dormant tradition of labor activism in West Virginia has been boldly reignited, and the dominoes continue to fall. Yesterday, tens of thousands of West Virginia's brothers and sisters walked off their jobs in Kentucky and Oklahoma. Frank, I'm going to take a line from Carole King. I feel the earth move under my feet. What is going on in West Virginia?
It's a great question, Jim. We know that back starting in 2008 and maybe even before, these austerity budgets that have been passed since then in many of our states, but particularly our right-to-work states, like West Virginia, who had, as you mentioned, a long labor history, particularly in the private sector labor movement. The United Mine Workers were very strong there in every aspect of their government. But since then, these austerity budgets have crippled our public schools. West Virginia is has many areas of poverty, a huge opioid addiction problem there, and it's very difficult to hire and retain teachers there. Finally, the teachers have had enough. They can't get qualified teachers. The ones that do work there work in substandard conditions there. They feel impoverished, and it's unprecedented that they would have 55 counties voting unanimously to go out on strike and shut down the entire state. Every school in the state, there are 680 schools in the state of West Virginia. Every single one of them closed. The government actually made a move knowing that that there was a statewide walkout. Everyone walked out. It wasn't an easy process. During the walkout, the governor supported finding a way to fund the schools more. The House of Representatives in West Virginia agreed to a 5% increase, and then the Senate balked on it, which shut down that process and forced people out onto the street. So it was, as you said, unprecedented. It was built on years of people feeling that they were underappreciated, underpaid. Many teachers had to work extra jobs. They couldn't, they were barely making above minimum wage. The other thing that really complicated this whole healthcare, this whole labor strife in West Virginia was that the cost of their healthcare, they're in a state-provided plan that all public employees in the state are members of, and the premium rates continued to rise exorbitantly and dug into their already low wages. So people now, not only weren't they getting increases in salaries, but they were bringing home less money every month and trying to make ends meet. And it was just a very difficult situation that forced people to take dramatic action, which was just unprecedented, as you said.
From what I understand, in West Virginia, back to West Virginia we go, they had a deal, but they weren't happy with it, and they walked out.
We've characterized it as a teacher strike, but they went out on strike not only for the teachers themselves, but for all the public employees that work in the district, because they're all impoverished. The support teachers, the teacher assistants, the custodians, the secretaries, the whole community was working for impoverished wages. So it was a strike, and it was a strike for the students, because the students needed teachers to be in the classroom. They needed to hire and retain appropriately certified teachers, because they couldn't keep teachers, because, as you said, teachers were going to neighboring communities to make significantly more starting wage than some of the teachers were making after having taught in West Virginia schools for a number of years.
I saw a student last night on the national news holding a textbook, a school textbook, with no spine on the book, being held together with duct tape. So they're neglecting the school budgets for all this time, trying to keep taxes lower by not spending money on kids' education. We all know how important it is. That's our future, the kids' education. Do you think this is leading to a movement? I understand that yesterday, tens of thousands of teachers in Kentucky and Oklahoma walked off their jobs. And I did see one of the heads of the union in Oklahoma say, yeah, we're getting a deal, but we're not taking it, because they're not talking about the janitors, they're not talking about the secretaries, support staff, and the folks that work in providing food for these individuals. I really think this is the beginning of a movement here.
It's a huge movement, and one thing you have to consider is outside of Charleston, West Virginia, it's mostly rural communities, and the people that teach there, they work in the schools. Their children go to schools in the same communities. They go to the same churches and civic organizations with all of the members of the community. So they all know one another, and this is a movement that's really it's a grassroots movement that everyone in the community is rallying around these schools, because they know that the teachers are there to provide an education for their kids, and they can't do it without the appropriate resources. And the state of West Virginia largely funds their schools. It's not like they have a lot of local property tax revenue that's able to do that because of the rural nature of most of West Virginia. So they needed to get those teachers, those community groups and church groups engaged so that they could get the support they needed to be successful in this. And one of the things they also did that in preparing for this, they knew that many of these kids, over 2/3 of the kids in West Virginia, are on free and reduced lunch. So they knew that if they were out for any prolonged period of time, they need to have alternative places for those kids to go and get food. So they worked with the local churches and state and local food banks to make sure that these kids didn't go without food and provide, because that's the nature of the community relationship. And that is so important if you're going to be successful and get the court of public opinion on your side.
We've had good, strong unions here in Rhode Island for teachers for many years now. And we've got in West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma. I mean, I think you'll agree with me. This is going to keep moving. There's no doubt about it. It almost kind of reminds me of this movement that these kids from Parkland High School, what they've started has become a movement. I really believe that this is going to also be just as big and just as heavy a movement. And now, while we've got pretty good wages and benefits and working conditions here in Rhode Island, how do we make legislators in Rhode Island see that education is the top priority for our future?
Well, I think that we do have a good funding formula in Rhode Island. The General Assembly has continued, and the governor have continued year after year to continue to fund schools. There was always a need to do more things. Right now, our top priority is a bond issue that's we're hoping to get before the electorate next fall, get it through the General Assembly this session, and getting the legislators on board to fix our schools. We've got schools that are over 60 years old. The average age is over 60 years old. Mm-hmm. We want to send our kids to warm, safe, dry, state-of-the-art schools where they can get the best possible education, and it takes money to bring the schools up to that condition, and we're hoping that the General Assembly gets behind that initiative.
I see with the Fix Our Schools Now coalition, largely supported and begun by a collection of labor unions. Great coalition, and it's become now Lisa Nelson, who's kind of running the Fix Our School Now coalition, and is also involved even more deeply in this because she's got a really good handle on it, is really moving to get this kind of work done. Now, this is not only just for the students and the school teachers, but also for the building trades that are going to build these schools and repair these schools. So this is a big win all around. I'm excited about what's going on. I'm excited about what you guys are doing, and thanks for coming here to Labor Vision. This is very topical. It's going on right now. We appreciate you coming aboard.
Thank you, Jim. Anytime.
That's it for Labor Vision tonight. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.